I would like to acknowledge that I am joining you today from my home in Devon, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting ground, gathering place, and traveling route for the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Stoney Nakoda. I would like to acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I believe a treaty is an inheritance, a responsibility, and a relationship. I hope that recognizing our status as treaty people is one small action of many that will help us to be good neighbors to one another, good stewards of the land, and good ancestors to all our children. I do welcome you to share in the chat if you are joining us from a treaty area that is different than Treaty 6 or Treaty 6. And we will get going. So AMAASE, as I said, is our monthly opportunity for members of the social enterprise ecosystem to access and ask questions of a panel of capacity builders. It's held on the second Wednesday of every month from 3:30 to 5 Mountain Time. These sessions are designed with our audience and attendees being the driver of the discussion. So those of you who are not currently highlighted in the middle are the ones who are actually in charge. It's your time and your questions that we're all here for. So I do invite you to start getting your questions ready so we can make the most of our time together while I introduce our panelists. Today we have Brittany Kurlick from the Trico Foundation, Jane Bisbee from the Social Enterprise Fund, Cheeto Shoko from Momentum, Dan Overall from Trico Foundation, and Meredith Perk from Innovate Calgary. Thank you all panelists for joining us today. We've been spicing it up a little bit, which has been lovely. So we welcome Cheeto. This is his first time as a panelist on AMAASE. So choose to be gentle or not be gentle as you see fit. So now I will invite you, the audience, to share your questions.
Okay, my name is Eldos Wong. I'm the current president of this called Calgary Chinese Elderly Citizens Association, CCECA. And the mission is prolong our Chinese senior in Calgary to live independently. So for those of you who are familiar with Kirby Center, you might consider this is a Chinese version of the Kirby Center. And we have about 2,000 members, 1.3 to $1.5 million budget from 3 levels of government and incorporated under Alberta Society Act. One thing I want to explore today, this is just one particular opportunity. Is in the lower left-hand corner. It's called Volunteer Handy Person Project. It's a project started with funding from the city and Calgary foundations. Intended is to provide minor repair to our independent living seniors. So we have about 20 to 30 volunteers. The city actually provided the trainings, even with the tools, and then help us to kickstart the project. And it's been doing great. And city run out of money. So currently we fund this program ourselves. It's one of our, from my view, is one of our signatures delivery in our community. And the client's eligibility is on the bottom right-hand side. So this is based on the program in 2019. So we targeted to be senior living with dependent children, low income. And as you know, we definitely have income. We definitely have seniors that is not does not meet that requirement, and they wanted to receive service from us. In fact, they want to receive more than just the quote unquote our current manual. A little bit is in the bottom, like painting, door knob, smoke detector. But most of our volunteers actually are retired handy persons. So I get to ask from time to time when members provide feedbacks to us. They say, "Hey, I'm willing to pay, but I live with my independent children, but they are working. They are very busy. They don't have time to shop around, looking after the minor repairs." And so, as you can see it currently, we don't provide service to them. So I just wanted to throw that out to the panels. Is that an opportunity? Is that an opportunity for social enterprise? And then how do we go about doing it? So I'm in an exploration stage. I just want to know a little bit on what are the next few steps I need to consider. Questions?
I suppose I do have one question, which is around what is it you actually are asking us?
So right now we have members who are, they are not qualified as a low income.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they want your services?
They want our services. Now, reason is because the association has a reputation.
Yeah. And are they willing to pay?
They're willing to pay.
Then you don't have a problem.
No.
I mean, this is almost an ideal situation in that you have customers showing up that wish to buy the services.
Yeah. Now, of course, I need to gear up our capability. Sorry.
Well, that's absolutely the case. You don't want to set up a situation where you have more demand from customers that you can't rationally and effectively address. That's often the biggest challenge for any business scaling, is that they have their expectations kind of run away with things, and they're put in a situation where they can't meet the demand in a good way, and that can be really difficult.
Okay. So I guess,
Do you think what is the reluctance to accept a new group of customers that are different than the ones you've been serving so far?
well, first we need to make sure we have the capability, and then we need to have the insurance and a whole bunch of stuff, like in case of we damage their home or whatever, right? Like
well, hopefully you have those things now.
Well, the type of things we do right now, of course, is very, as I say, very minor.
So I think sort of that piece around how do we potentially scale up to this other customer group that might be able to pay us for services? And then on the other side is, do we continue doing these minor repairs that we are currently doing, or do we look at kind of expanding those? I think it's sort of the two pieces you're looking at. And I think Jane has a really great point there in terms of saying, ensuring that you can serve these customers in the best way possible is a key piece. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, because I believe you're a charitable organization, ensuring that what you do offer still keeps you in line with your charitable objectives and with CRA is something that you probably want to talk to a lawyer about. We're not lawyers, so that's something that you might want to consider. But if you start looking at, well, what is this sort of scaling up, whether it be a new group of seniors that maybe can pay us and we start generating some revenue through those individuals, or if it's we start having new offerings that potentially we generate some revenue from as well, whether it's to the previous audience or a new audience, is really understanding what does that cost and what do you have to have in place in order to serve the needs of this group that you're looking at. So one of the things that like Trico works with organizations is looking at what are the key steps and costs? So what do you have to do in order to deliver on that offering, but also what are the expectations from your customers? What do they need to have as well? So you said even things like the client eligibility you currently have is they need to be able to pay for sort of the basic materials. What does that look like, depending on whether it's a new paying audience or whether it's a new sort of type of service, and thinking through those pieces of, what does it cost us to deliver? What does that cost us in terms of insurance? What are those needs that we have to do? So really thinking through those key steps of what is involved, and then thinking through how does this sort of align with our charitable mission, our goal. Understanding those pieces is another key piece, because there's a number of different ways that you can go about this. The other thing is thinking through, so you said you've had some people come and say, hey, we don't meet the income level requirement of your current program, but we're interested, is really understanding what those individuals are, what types of services they're looking for. So are they looking for sort of those ones that you're currently doing, or are there other services? And then the other piece is, what are they actually willing to pay, or what can they pay? And thinking about it in terms of those key steps and costs to think through, is this feasible for us to move our idea forward?
Okay, now let me just something get it clear in my own head. Is this a company underneath CCECA, or is that actually a separate company?
So what I would note is we don't talk about legal advice here. And unfortunately, this probably falls into the legal advice realm, because there are different ways that different types and different corporations are able to engage in social entrepreneurship. And it really comes down to, how does it align with your mission? What is being impacted? There are some legal resources, but ultimately, talking to a lawyer is going to be key for you to see what is the best structure. But having said that, you kind of need to know what you're doing and then figure out the best structure, because you want to make sure that if you are meeting with a lawyer, that you're making the best use of that time. So you really want form to follow function. You want to know what the function is and then determine the best incorporation or way that it works in order to do the good that you're trying to do in your community.
Okay.
I noticed Cheetah had come off of mute, but just one quick thing before we go. It seems to me, listening to this, that the real major change that you should maybe first look at is, how do you accept some customers who can pay? The first step may not be changing your offering, that you would do the same kind of business, but add in customers who can actually pay as your first step. And then you can use that to start to do the research about the next steps. I would also say you may want to talk to your insurance people, because even if you're not having customers pay now, I would think you would still have the same sorts of insurance implications that you would even if they're paying. So I kind of make sure about that. I'll let Cheetah go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say it sounds like you have a good problem, because your concern is you have your demand outstrips your capacity. So in that case, I would say, like, maybe stop, kind of look at it kind of the opposite way and say, what is my capacity? If you can only, for example, serve 15 customers or clients, just ensuring that you're only operating at that pace and scale as you perhaps need to, because what you don't want to do is to, if your service is highly regarded in the community, get to a point where you overextend yourself and you're not able to provide the same level and quality of service that you're known for in the community. And then in terms of people paying, because if you are still kind of operating that underneath the charity banner, I would say you can employ a income scale. So if it's people, for example, earning less than 24,000, that would kind of still fall under people that you're doing that as for free. And as that income increases, you can kind of determine what the pay scales for if you're making 40,000 or 50,000 or 60,000. And I think that's still it would align with your mission.
Okay. So yeah, I like this sort of a sliding scale.
Yeah.
Except just questioning, can we start to, as a charitable organizations, can we start to charge? Because that would be something totally different from our current model. For example, we do income tax for the low income seniors right now. And once again, another things, from time to time, people come to us and say, hey, your volunteers are all qualified accountant. I'm willing to pay and all that stuff. We kind of have no good answer to those questions.
Yeah, I would say like that question is bordering again on like legal and tax implications.
Yes, it is, but the truth is I have many clients who are charitable, have charitable status, charge for services.
Got it.
You go to see a theater performance or a symphony performance. Those are probably charitable nonprofits, and they're charging you for the seat, right?
Yes.
So it's about how you structure it and how you handle it, but it's not impossible for you to provide services for which you charge.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, that's sort of the piece around kind of figuring out with a lawyer what is the best way to structure it, because there are stipulations for charitable organizations to be able to run things like related businesses under their charitable organization. There are pieces around, are they volunteer run? There's things around how often and frequency. So there's a lot of stipulations around it and different pieces to it. So that's why talking to a lawyer to understand your individual case is so key.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for your question. I just wanted to double check, Meredith and Dan, did you guys have anything to add before we move forward?
I would maybe just add that like I understand that it can feel really overwhelming at the beginning of a journey, right? Because you're trying to consider everything all at once, right? As you sort of sift through this. And so I would just encourage you to really think about like what are the resources and the tools that you have like in the community or within your organization or in your network to really like help you make informed decisions, whether that's accessing tools through Trico or through other like social enterprise organizations, or like thinking about sort of like the human resources and sort of the people capacity that you need on your team to like really move this forward in a meaningful way, or like really test the viability of it.
Okay.
And to build on Meredith's point, Trico, we're a big believer in learning from those who are doing it. So if you could reach out to other charitable organizations that have supportive environments and see if they're doing some type of handyman service, and then learning as much as you can from them in terms of legalities, what they charge, profitability, try to learn as much as possible from those who are currently doing this in similar situations. We'll fast track you like you won't believe.
All right. Thank you. I think there's another organization, I read it in the newspaper last year, doing a similar things in Calgary. Thank you. All right, I will stop shares.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your question. Eleanor, are you available and able to say your question on video, or did you want me to read it out?
Sorry, yeah, just trying to mute, unmute, all that kind of stuff. There you go. And adjust my computer. So I just had a question about, are there any trends in social enterprise that we should be watching? And I'm the manager of economic development for the town of Canmore. So I work with a lot of entrepreneurial startups. What is an effective way to support, make sure that they're successful, and how do we get more? Because there is a trend specifically from younger buyers to be more aware of what a company stands for, and they're willing to make that shift to purchasing from or supporting charities, and social enterprise fits in the whole gamut of things. So what are the trends and how can we support? That's really what I'm looking for.
How many hours have we got?
I have any time you want to give me, Jane.
Yeah, this is a big, big topic. Maybe Dan, you probably are doing most of the reading.
I can go first if you want. Step number one is we need to, I feel like I'm going to read this. Step number one is we need to realize that social entrepreneurship isn't just one conversation, it's many conversations. And the three big ones are, Jane often says, and she's absolutely right, if we could just take what's taught in business school and bring that to social impact organizations so that they're better at businesses, absolutely. Conversation number one, how do we do that? But the problem is there's a lot going on that's not taught in business school. In fact, we could actually teach business school. And that's the second conversation, which is by better understanding how the social and the entrepreneurial blend, we can actually transform current social impact models. That's conversation number two. And then conversation number three is, I think we need to transform capitalism and realize that there's an alternative to being driven by profit maximization, and we can actually focus on solving problem maximization. So we need to be respectful of all these conversations. As we say at Trico, we need a conversation that's inclusive. Everybody that cares about making the world a better place has a spot, but it's also aspirational, where we really push ourselves in what the best promise of social entrepreneurship is. And for us at Trico, we really try to focus on just asking ourselves the question and pushing the conversation about just how far could we go in solving the world's problems if we fully harness the power of business models to serve social needs. So very high level, those are like three trends and conversations that we're trying to nurture at Trico.
Thanks, Dan. I do welcome other panelists to share anything that they've experienced in their work that might add to what Dan's had to say.
All I'm going to say is what he said. Like, that's what we've got to do. And it will take us hours to drill down on all of those, but that's what we got to do.
Thanks, Jane.
And I can add maybe from from momentum side, like what we see, because we work with small business owners or aspiring small business owners. And one of the things that I've noticed, I don't know if it's a trend, it's just my own unscientific analysis. When we have people, come in, there's this assumption that, adding social or environmental responsibility to your business model is not profitable, or maybe it's something I should aspire to do maybe 5 years down the road when I'm making a little more money, as opposed to blending everything all to blending those three elements together. Because a lot of times, especially with the younger generation now, if you're not socially or environmentally responsible, they probably won't support your business as much. So that's one of the, just educating or imparting that knowledge to especially younger entrepreneurs.
Thanks, Cheeto. Meredith, Brittany, anything to add?
I'm gonna let you go, Meredith.
Oh, I haven't even decided what I'm going to say yet, other than to say that, yeah, I mean, I also think you've correctly identified a consumer trend in this space in your question. And I'm sort of mulling over the second part of your question, which I think we haven't really addressed yet, which is sort of how to support from a supply side this growing demand or awareness of consumers in making some of these decisions. So that's what I'm thinking about. I don't know if any other panelists want to jump in while I do that.
That was what I think the intent of the benefits corporation designations was that if you haven't come across B Corp, you might want to go and take a look at what it was. Essentially, it was a way to for companies to be able to identify themselves to consumers about if you want a company that actually has a 360-degree approach to community and how it works in community, that we could see each other, kind of like Better Business Bureau on speed. But it's never really, I think, caught on in the consumer kind of marketplace on the supply side, which is sorry, on the purchaser's side, which is unfortunate. Maybe the time has come, but that's a bit of an interesting puzzle. When you were raising the question, I was saying, well, he's B Corp, but it doesn't seem to work as well as one might hope.
I think it's a growing term that people in its awareness, and at least that's what I'm seeing in our business community.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it's a conversation we're having more frequently with startups and entrepreneurs. And I love what Shido says is like the awareness piece from the starting point, from when you're ideating, when you're starting your business, incorporating that sustainability and that social impact piece as a core value is what we're seeing here in Canmore, at least. But yeah,
that clean mountain air that makes it think that way.
Thanks, Eleanor, for your question. I see just another one. Delilah, did you want to share yours in the to the panelists? Are you able to turn your video on or unmute?
When launching a social enterprise, what statutes or laws that do you have to comply to? Is there like a few, and then what regulations like are there when you're trying to launch or operate under a social enterprise?
Okay, who wants to go? I'm looking at Brittany.
Yeah, so it's a tricky question because we're not lawyers. But I will say there's no actual legal status for social enterprise. And so different organizations go about it in different ways. Some charitable organizations use things like related businesses that fall underneath their charitable mandate, whereas others do a potential separate for-profit business. And so there's different ways that organizations structure themselves, and then based on that structure, you would have sort of the laws and the legal stuff based on your structure. But unfortunately, there's no like clear cut, like I'm going to become a social enterprise and that's how I'm going to designate myself, and this is legally what I am. What the piece that you did miss, and we talked about this a bit earlier, is one of the key things about that is always talking to a lawyer about what is the best legal status that suits my goals. But for us, one of the pieces is always sort of figuring out what are our goals and what are we trying to do, so that form follows function. So you know what you're trying to do, and then you figure out the best form that will allow you to achieve that goal.
I'm going to challenge your word, unfortunately, Brittany, because I think actually it's a good thing that any corporate structure can be used to house a social enterprise. And how I have come to think about it, the social enterprise is no longer, it's not a noun, it's not a thing, it's a way of doing. And Dan, I'm going to ask you to give the definition because you do it better than I can do it. That social enterprise is about a way of operating your business, and it's about a way of internalizing certain sorts of goals and positions that you want to have in community. And so what you really need to do is what Brittany said, is find the correct legal structure that will best house and best support the business that you want to actually operate. We had a huge change in the Social Enterprise Fund right at the beginning, because we started out saying we will only support nonprofit or cooperative structures. And that turned out to be a huge mistake, because a couple of our earliest loans were to organizations that turned themselves into pretzels to become nonprofit structures. And that turned out to be the worst possible model to operate their businesses. And they did that to get at our money. So that was dumb. So we stopped doing that. It's really important for you to think about the business and what it's going to be and what it's going to look like, and then do the research with a lawyer around what that best structure is that will help you manage that business in real time in the right way. So I think it's good that we don't have a special social enterprise corporate structure. 2 provinces in Canada do, and they kind of don't work in either one from the reports I've had back. So that's not something that I would say that we should try to do, but you really do need to think. Your question and your thought process is right. And that you need to know what's the best way to manage what it is you're trying to do. But there's no special legal designation for a social enterprise.
Well, and I will say, what I should have said is, unfortunately, there's no clear-cut answer for you. Not that unfortunately, there's no legal structure that makes it clear-cut and easy.
Thanks, Brittany and Jane. Cheeto, Dan, and Meredith, did you have anything to add to that?
Not really. I think it's been said already. Just that there's no specific structure for a social enterprise. It doesn't only have to be a not-for-profit. It could be a for-profit as well. So you do have that latitude, that leeway, I guess, to pick whatever structure best suits what you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. And thank you, Delilah, for your question. Was that what you were looking for? Did you have any follow-up questions?
So I guess I just wanted to know, especially if you're writing like a business plan, you need to know the regulations and the statutes, the laws that you have to comply to when operating a business or a nonprofit. So if there isn't any, then I wonder, like, does anyone know if like the government is trying to adopt federal ones, if there is, or because to me, I like to have stuff planned out and to know what it is that I have to follow. So basically in Alberta, there's kind of basically free reign to operate under social enterprise, or am I taking a for-profit, nonprofit regulations, like, and merging those 2 documents, or like?
No, you will have to have a corporate structure, a legal corporate structure, but it can be any of the existing ones, and you can operate them within social enterprise principles. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's still kind of unclear, but I feel like if there isn't anything at this point, then I guess it's just trying to navigate as best as you can until one comes down the line. I don't know.
They've talked about going that route, but I don't think it's going to happen. So,
Meredith, I saw you had unmuted. Did you have anything to add or any clarifying questions?
Just maybe similar to Jane. I was just gonna say, it's like sort of like a matter of like order of operations. Like you will, decide sort of like what your mission is, sort of what your general model is, and then you will pick a legal structure that like suits and is appropriate for that. So it's not that you won't have a legal structure, just that there's not only one that is suited to social enterprise. And then I would like even like extend the ambiguity even further to say like that's maybe because like social enterprise, there are some general principles that we typically agree on constitute a social enterprise, but there's also not sort of like one definition to rule them all of social enterprise as well. So yeah, I leave you with that.
Thanks, Meredith. AMAASE, where we make everything less clear and more ambiguous by answering your questions. Dan, I saw you unmuted.
Yes, Delilah, I would also consult with those you'll be working with and those you're going to be wanting to serve in your social enterprise, as well as potential funders that you think you'll be going at, to see what their comfort level is with various structures. For example, I can guarantee you there's some funders that won't go near you if you're not for profit or charitable. There's some funders that won't go near you unless you're for profit. So you need to kind of map out who you think your kind of orbit of influence, your key stakeholders are, and see what kind of legal structure they would like you to be, and then decide for yourself where the fit is.
And talk to a lawyer once you kind of start knowing exactly what you want to do, because they can help direct you around some of those laws and things that you're going to need to follow.
And I'm going to add to Dan's comment, not just funders, but also your customers, because some customer relationships might depend on what your corporate structure is. Same way as straight funding bodies. So, and the third piece then is the management style. If you have a not-for-profit society with a board that directs everything, that's going to be a different kind of decision-making process than a closely held not-for-profit corporation, for example, which doesn't have an outside board that it has to go to. So people usually want to talk to me about what corporate structure should we have, and my answer is usually, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about telling me what your business is going to look like, how it's going to operate day to day, where you think your revenue stream is coming from. And once you can analyze all those things, then that will give you many of the answers you need to decide what your corporate structure should be. Then you go off to the lawyer and say, okay, I think I've researched this and I think I've got it right. Here's what I want it to look like. Here's how I want it to act on a day-to-day walking around basis. Does that structure that I've chosen work? So to me, that seems like the process for it. Rather than worrying about the structure first, that's almost the last thing.
Just while we wait, do the panelists have any questions? Eleanor is asking us to start with the definition of social enterprise. I've opened a can of worms, my apologies. Jane, I do think you had asked Dan to kind of share his definition of social enterprise. Maybe that would be a good place to start.
So ours is a simplified version of the Canadian Task Force on Social Finance, which I think is, Lordy, is it like 15 years ago? But it really just comes down to the intentionality of using business models to serve social needs.
I'm going to tap onto that while we, just because then I don't have to define it myself, is one of the things too that I think we've been really working on in regards to that is that there's different ways in which organizations can have that impact and can impact social issues. And so when Dan talked about having conversations that are inclusive and aspirational, is really looking at, different ways in which organizations can have that social impact. So for example, we saw tons of buy one, give one models. We saw a lot of models of organizations that maybe were donating a percentage of their profit to a social cause. And that had led to a lot of debate back in the day. Dan and I have both been with Trico for over 10 years and used to have a lot of debate around, well, is that social enterprise? Isn't that social enterprise? And for us, it's less about is it or isn't it? It's about how are they having social impact? Has that been a key piece? And then let's look at the different ways that we can have social impact and the different tools that we can do or that we can use and employ in that process.
Thanks, Brittany. We do have a couple questions, so maybe I'll pause the rest of the definitions of social enterprise and maybe we'll come back to that if we need to fill time. So Eleanor has asked, we have two, so we should have no problem getting through both. Eleanor has asked if we can provide some examples of successful Canadian social enterprise models. I'm sure the panelists will love this question. Does maybe Cheeto, Meredith, we haven't heard from you guys. Do you have anything to share with that one, or if anyone has anything standing out to them?
I'm thinking.
I'll throw out some because I was actually working on some of this morning. So tons of really great, exciting examples. We have an award called the Social Enterprise with a Z, which celebrates best examples of social entrepreneurship across Canada, whether they're for-profit, charitable, not-for-profit, no matter their legal structure. And so tons of exciting ones in Calgary, but I'm going to talk about Ember Staffing Solutions, Ember Staffing Solutions out of the downtown east side in Vancouver. And they were a recipient of our Social Enterprise Award in 2012. And at the time, they were in the under $1 million in revenue category. And what they do is they work with individuals who have barriers to employment in the downtown east side. So whether it's addictions, educational gaps, things like that. And they work with large construction companies and actually send these individuals out to job sites and to be temporary staff. And so they do training with them. They have a van that gets them there. They provide benefits to people who are longstanding. And so in doing that, now I just read an article that I think was from 2021. And I think it was, now I can't remember the exact million. I think it was like $20 million profit or $16 million profit now. So huge growth in the last like 10 years of this organization, and employing like up to 300 people a day on these job sites. So pretty cool organization that has seen a lot of growth in the last 10 years in Canada.
Thanks, Brittany. And I see Jane has directed to some of the examples on the Social Enterprise Fund website. They have their clients listed there as well. So another source. Any other examples of specific models that anyone can think of?
I can throw one in, although Brittany did take my favorite. So obviously ocean plastic is a huge challenge. And what we particularly like at Trico is examples of social enterprise that really kind of push your thinking on, again, just the capacity of business models to address social problems. So like, imagine if you want to deal with ocean plastic as an issue, and you'd obviously pay people to collect the plastic, and there's a, what do we do with the plastic? And it's a US example, but Borreo actually collects ocean plastics and makes skateboards and sells them. But there's a Canadian company that pays collectors to collect plastic. And what it did is, well, you know, we can sell things like skateboards and things like that, but like, how do we really imagine the use of plastic? So they've actually discovered this process where they repurpose the plastic and it turns it into pellets. So then they're sold to companies that use plastic themselves. So you see, you're now kind of disrupting the whole, not only do you have a bigger supply chain because it's business to business, you can make more money, but you're now actually breaking the loop of using plastic. And this company is called Plastic Bank. I think it's like one of the most unheralded social enterprise stories in Canada. It's absolutely just an amazing example. There's millions and millions of dollars in revenue, and they have all these international partnerships with people who are collecting as well as companies, and just an extraordinary success. But again, this fantastic idea of just pushing, like, just how far could we go in not only collecting plastics and incentivizing the collection of plastics, but how do we actually then take that to break the cycle of plastics being used and then thrown into the ocean? So it's one of my emerging favorite examples in Canada.
Thanks. I'm just going to, I hope this is okay, Mac. I'm going to jump really quick to Jill's comment in the chat because it's very closely tied to the question we're answering right now. And then I'll loop back to yours because I think it's a good transition. So Jill, I don't know if you want to unmute and expand on your question. I think you mean defines them as a social enterprise. I was alternating between defines and denies, and I went with defines because it changed the sentence structure quite a bit.
Yes, you are correct. Sorry, my typo. It's defined. So yeah, really what I'm trying to identify is what is the difference between a social enterprise and a business that has corporate social responsibility as one of its pillars of values. And that's often no more than a large charitable donation.
That's where we end up in these long discussions around how much social is truly a social enterprise, and sometimes it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, for us, that would not be enough. A company that does not have other social or community benefits baked into its operation. We look for a 360 if we can find it level, but that becomes a definition point. That's, for example, what our investors want to see. They would not accept that a company that says, well, we donate 10% of our profits to charitable organizations, but then are, burning down the environment and paying slave wages to do that. They would not accept that that's a social enterprise. So it's kind of a sliding scale. More social benefit, I think, is better, but it really is in the eye of the beholder in a way, which is part of our challenge, and part of the challenge around how do we measure real impact. There's a bit of ESG washing going on in the world right now, and so it's how do you push people to a further level of engagement and responsibility in the community. So I'm not sure there's a absolute answer for you.
So I'm going to speak up because I think it's like that piece around being inclusive and aspirational that has been kind of our theme today. Is I think there's this piece around, as social enterprise becomes more commonly known, there's also trends and models and what people see. So we went through trends where it was a lot of buy one, give one models that maybe were not the most impactful or had some challenges, or there's we donate a portion of our profits. And I talked earlier about how we think about different ways in which organizations have impact. And for some, for example, funders, or for some customers, different things are going to appeal to them, right? What are they excited about, and what actually gets them excited about that business is going to get them there. And I think that's a really key piece is we talk about how sort of we were seeing a lot of those buy one, give one models, or those donating a percentage, is that's what a lot of founders of social enterprises were seeing as examples. So that's kind of what they had to look up to and were the models that they saw. So I think that piece around how do we get that aspirational piece, how do we get really excited about what the space could be, is key. And the other thing is that organizations can evolve over time. And so one of the organizations that we talk a lot about in our assessment materials is not an organization that I would have ever expected to be talking about 10 years later. And that's 10 Tree. Dan actually used to go out to some community members and say, hey, what's your favorite example of social enterprise? And some organizations would say, 10 Tree is my favorite example. And others would say, that's not social enterprise. And 10 Tree, when they started out, is for every t-shirt, they were selling t-shirts at the time, for every t-shirt sold, they would plant 10 trees. Really simple model, but a model that has some challenges in terms of you have customers who are there for the trees, you have customers who are there for the t-shirts, you have to be good at two things. You have to be good at making t-shirts, you also have to be good at planting trees. It's a model with some tension in it. And then essentially what they're doing with their social impact is they're using their profit to pay for these 10 trees, right? So it's a model that's very similar. So instead of giving a check, we're taking that money and we're planting 10 trees. So we're using our profit for that impact. Well, 10 years later, they're actually a really exciting example of social entrepreneurship. So they started out there, but they evolved in the way that they're having social impact. So one, they got really stringent on what type of materials their t-shirts were made from. Right? That's what their customers wanted. They didn't want just the cheapest material there. They wanted these environmental practices in the t-shirts and in their process. They also got really strict about what factories they worked with in terms of human rights. They started planting trees around the factories that they work with, which actually brings down their environmental footprint. And then they also have if you buy a t-shirt from them, you can actually return it to them at end of life and get a benefit for your next purchase so that it's not ending up in the landfill. And so that's one of the things I want to keep in mind is that maybe something isn't the most exciting way of social impact doesn't get your mojo going. It's not really exciting, but that doesn't mean an organization isn't going to evolve over time and become something really cool as they get more exposed to examples of social entrepreneurship and different ways of doing things, or more engaged with their customers and the other options that are available. So that's what I would just say.
I think it's like an absolutely crucial question. I think we as a movement have a choice as to where we want to take this conversation. Do we want to have this debate about, well, you are a social enterprise, you're not, if you just donate charities? Because I've gone through most definitions, and I think you'd be hard pressed if someone created an organization just to generate revenue so they can then donate. That social intentionality prevents them from being a social enterprise by technical definition. So we can have that conversation. You know, can we have that definition debate? Or we can have this conversation of, well, if you're a business and you really care about your impact, let's have a deeper conversation as to how far you can go. So that's beyond just donating. So again, we're trying to nudge it so that's past that definition debate and more about, if you're serious about this, let's have a conversation as to just how deep you can go in terms of thinking about not only the products you make, but how you make them, how you pay people, how you donate. You include that as well, right? So this is this rich conversation we can have for those that actually care to have it as to how far we can go on these ideas and using business models to have social impact. And unfortunately, I find most of the sector is still on the definition stuff, as opposed to, whoa, how far can we actually take this idea and help those who really want to run with it to go as far as they can, so they could actually then inspire others and actually change the dynamic of how we see the power of businesses.
Thank you, Dan. I think we may have answered our whole social enterprise definition question. Cheeto and Meredith, did you guys have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add, like, it's it's a bit of a tricky question. Like, if you know, because if you're doing it just to tick off the boxes and it's not in the DNA of your organization, in terms of what you're doing, like how you're are you paying a living wage, the materials that you're using, you know, it's not enough. I don't think, to say I'm going to give, you know, 5% of my profits to such and such a cause. It's like everyone in the organization should be breathing, living those values. So I think it's you're kind of splitting hairs, but for me, like, I think it has to be, you know, in your organization's DNA, as opposed to in December at some point or the end of your financial year, then you make a donation, right?
Thanks, Cheeto. Meredith, any last thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just in agreement. I think we've all sort of echoed similar sentiments around, you know, social enterprise being very like intentional, authentic, sort of sustained, not a flavor of the week type impact and relationships that organizations hold. And I think that's helpful to understand as this sort of like aspirational, like loose common understanding of, you know, where we're all trying to get to. But yeah, just to say, like, as part of an inclusive conversation too, I mean, I think like we could have conversations about impact with like any organization, right? Like you're a for-profit entity and you pay your taxes, right? Like that's somewhere on a spectrum of something, right? And so yeah, just to say that I find these conversations about definitions really interesting in terms of like what's a useful application of this conversation, and like, yeah, how far do we need to take that?
Well, and I just want to add too is I think we've kind of focused on sort of like maybe the for-profit side of things in a lot of these pieces, but a charitable organization also has to think about sort of the whole inclusive package. So whether you're for-profit, nonprofit, charitable, thinking about that piece of how do we treat our employees? Do we pay a living wage? Things like that, because there's also examples on I think a lot of times people think like, well, for-profits maybe are the ones who aren't doing the good. They aren't doing like all they should be doing, but you also have to think like some charitable organizations might not be paying a living wage to some of their people because of government grants and things like that. And there may be a reason for it and there might not be. So I think that piece around how do we what are our goals as an organization, and then how do we implement them is such a key thing. And that can go across many parts of your business.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm just going to add my little ecosystem building 2 cents to this one. I find that the understanding of social enterprise that we use is sometimes very situation dependent. When I'm talking to a lot of not-for-profits, sometimes we actually need to focus more on business sustainability than social impact. And when I'm talking to a few university students, just the idea of not just focusing on profit can be really powerful. So being flexible on meeting people where they're at, for less of a better term, and helping kind of guide along that spectrum, because I do find the audience vastly changes the definition of social enterprise in any given situation. Thank you all for that. I am gonna, if there was a most patient attendee award, Mac would definitely get it. So thank you for your patience, Mac. And I did see, sorry, my dog, it's that time of night. I did see that Mac said he doesn't have audio video, so I will read his question out and then open it to the panelists. So how should a social enterprise consider looking for a loan from a bank versus something like a social enterprise fund loan? When might you pursue one over the other? And I'm inclined, Jane, to almost make you go last for this one, just for funsies, but nobody else. Oh, Cheeto, did you unmute there?
Oh, just, yeah. Just like I would say, like, with depends on what stage that organization is. So if it's a newer organization, if it's in the startup phase, the painful truth is, if you go to traditional financial institutions and you don't have a history of at least 2 years of operations, the likelihood of you getting any financing is pretty slim. So seeking out other organizations, they are. I saw Jane raise her hand. Yeah, there are other organizations that you can approach that would have a better understanding of a social enterprise model, especially at the startup phase when you don't have any record of operation, any revenue generated. So I'd say, like, steer away from traditional financial institutions, especially in the startup phase.
Thanks, Cheeto. I won't actually make you go last, Jane. You can totally jump in.
I'm happy to go last. It's interesting to hear, but if you want, I'll launch into it. She's absolutely right. It starts with something. This is going to sound crass, but who will give you the money? And that often depends a lot on what you're doing and where you are in your business building journey, your organization's journey, as well as the interests of the financing body, right? The social finance intermediary, I'll call it that. That's what we are defined as by the federal government these days. So this is a matchmaking exercise in a lot of ways. I often tell people, after we get finished laughing about, well, who will give you the money, is around, do you want the money from that organization? Do you want the kind of relationship and business relationship you're going to have with them? Because that's really important. And that sometimes is the final test. After you've got the deal memo and you've looked at it, you need to, even as a borrower or someone receiving investment, think, okay, do I want to get into bed with these guys? Because you're going to have a long and hopefully fruitful relationship. And you want to like them, and you want to like how they operate. And if you don't like how they operate, you're probably going to be an unhappy person. The other thing that I think everybody forgets is that every operation, organization, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, whatever, needs a good banking relationship with a regular walking around everyday bank, because you got to have a bank account, you got to have ways for checks to come and go. So you do need that essential relationship, and you need to build that up. And you'll probably need a credit card, all of that kind of thing. So in some ways, you need more than one kind of financing organization. And at some point, just because the way that the economy works, you'll need a bank as well as other kinds of organizations. So I'll give you some pros and cons about loans CEF versus banks, banks versus CEF. A bank could probably give you a loan cheaper than I can because my money, how I acquire it, costs me more than the bank's money does. They can get money much cheaper. So they can offer loans at a lower rate if they want to. But be aware of the fees you're going to get charged, because you could get charged an annual fee, like a setup fee, an annual fee, legals fees, change fees, and you might not even be able to get out. We, on the other hand, don't charge those kinds of fees. The only fees we charge are to set up the legal security documents. So it's a one-time, and then you're not paying over and over. The other thing is around the structure of the deal and the securities. As Cheeto rightly said, they might not even look at you if you don't have any revenue, but they also may want to have you sign over your firstborn child and your house and your everything to them as the security. We take a look at security in a lot different way than a bank does, and because of how we were set up, I was charged to look at securities more imaginatively. And so I have taken securities on companies that I actually think are perfectly valid, like brand for a company, intellectual property, that kind of thing, where my banker friends kind of laugh me out of the room because they would never take that risk. They are not allowed to take risks in some ways because we all want secure banks, right? We want to know that our money is going to be in the bank when we go back to get it. So we have banking rules that they've got to live by. I'm in a different situation where I'm more like a, venture capitalist or an angel investor. That's the way I can look at a deal, as well as the kinds of things we can go into and kinds of securities I can actually accept. So it's a kind of a balancing act between the two. We do want banks to have those kinds of rules, but that means they can't maybe do the things that, as Cheeto mentioned. The banks can also be, and sometimes have to be, a little more capricious or a little more hard-nosed when they have to pull the plug on something. I have actually bought out loans from traditional banks for nonprofits who could no longer get their account manager to understand what they were doing. And they were going to pull the loan and essentially destroy the organization. And we stepped in and provided the loan instead. I'm happy to report, touch wood, those have all worked out so far. We've actually managed, they paid out. Bankers are in an interesting position, especially with a not-for-profit, because there's social values involved. And a bank doesn't want to be in a position where they might have to pull a loan and destroy the good community work that an organization is doing. But they also might come in and scoop. So I've had, for example, the Royal Bank came and offered a lower mortgage on a building purchase than what I could afford to offer, because they wanted to be attached to that organization. The loan was safe as houses. There was absolutely no question that this was going to go sideways. And so in that case, they were perfectly willing to do it. And they undercut me by 3 points, right, on what they could offer. And so I said that the group was kind of, oh no, we went through all of this and you said you'd give us the loan and we feel bad. It's like, don't apologize to me. You can save 3 points, do it. That's going to be like hundreds of $1,000s on a multi-million-dollar loan. You run and take that deal. So it's very much, you have to do the research at all the different levels and see whether or not it's a relationship you want to be into, it's a price that you want to be at, and can they actually give you the kinds of service that you want. For example, we have a hard time doing a straight line of credit, where you put the money in and out every day and that you only pay that day. We can kind of do something that sort of looks like that, but it's only kind of faking it a little bit, and it's slower to be able to respond. We're also slower just because of our structure on how we make decisions than a bank might actually be. So there's pros and cons. What is it you want the money to do? What's the size of it? And will that entity actually play with you, depending on where you are in your business growth and whether or not you have the securities that they'll go for. So that's sort of banking 101 fast.
Thanks, Jane. And I see Mac has put an incredibly helpful thank you into the chat. Dan, did you have something to add?
Yes, just typical Jane, fantastic list on this thing. Two other things to look out for on the social finance side is sometimes social finance funds will want you to go through a program or an incubator. They're not always the best, so you're going to have to scope out the time requirement and whether it's going to be useful to you or not. And some social finance funds actually require measurement reporting, so you're going to have to be very careful about whether that's something you're going to do and how much that would actually cost you. So I add those two things to Jane's list of things to look out for.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to reiterate that idea of all being learners here. I know I learned so much myself just being able to hear the questions that are being asked and the perspectives of the other panelists. And I think that's been reiterated by other panelists as well, and to the attendees for taking the time to spend with us on this afternoon. So we will do a quick checkout and give each of the panelists an opportunity to share any updates from their organizations, any closing thoughts they might have, or anything they want to share to our attendees. And then if the attendees do have anything that they want to pop in the chat, they're welcome to do so well. So just any closing thoughts or what you're taking with you today. We'll start with Meredith.
Oh no, I was frantically searching for a link to an event I wanted to invite you all to. So I'll put that in the chat after I share about it. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today. It was lovely, a lovely way to end the day. Innovate Calgary is launching the Social Innovation Hub at the end of the month, which is very exciting for us. It's the culmination of years of hard work and testing and iterating that my colleagues have been diligently doing over the past years. And so we're calling it a housewarming party on January 31st in Calgary at the Social Innovation Hub. It'll be in the morning from 10 till 12, an opportunity to hear from a few folks involved in the project. We'll have a panel of social entrepreneurs who we feel are really great examples of sort of social innovation that's done differently or taken some sort of non-traditional paths. And then an opportunity for just sort of networking and community building as well. So I'll put the link to that in the chat. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Meredith. Jane.
Other than thank you for the great questions, this is always fun. I got nothing else except money, so with that, come and talk.
Sounds good. Cheeto.
Okay. Yeah. So at Momentum, what the work we do is basically working with small business owners or aspiring small business owners, right from ideation phase right through to launch. And we have a program in particular called Design Your Business, where we are helping entrepreneurs incorporate social enterprise elements into their business, because sometimes people have a business and they don't know maybe how to incorporate those elements into their business model. So it's Design Your Business. It's momentum.org, and you will start a business. You'll see the different links there. And we also do have an element of our organization where we lend funds to small business owners, maybe not as much as Jane, but we have micro business loans up to $10,000 as well. Big difference between us and I guess a lot of other organizations is how stringent other organizations would be on startups. We look more at character. So I will stop there, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Cheeto. And thank you for coming and joining us as your first AMAASE session. We really appreciate your feedback. Dan.
Last AMAASE I read from A Christmas Carol, so I wish I could end with literature and social enterprise. I'm sure our attendance would drop. But I guess a really big thing is, I don't know if how many of you are aware of it, but the Canadian federal government has created a change where foundations can actually provide grants no longer to just charities, but to other organizations, which is like a huge change in Canadian law. And we're currently kind of grappling with that. The federal government just announced some guidelines to help guide foundations on how to actually do this. And they're accepting feedback till I think the end of the month, but it's a huge change. Trico certainly going to be involved with it. And I'm looking at using that as a process for expanding how foundations can actually support social enterprises that aren't necessarily charitable.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Brittany.
So Dan's always like throwing the stuff down because last time it was the reading and now exciting stuff happening, but check out our website. We have our Assess program, which offers a number of tools for organizations, and it's all available online for free. Tools for organizations that are maybe exploring a new social enterprise or looking to scale up an existing social enterprise. We have coaching for organizations who have gone through those materials. And then there's also funding available. And I'll just say currently to charitable organizations, because based on what Dan's saying, we'll see where things go in the future. So check out our website. I'll throw it in the chat link.
Thank you, Brittany. ABC does have a few things going on. If we have our design cafe, which will be coming up in March. The Q&A session for that is on Monday, and the deadline for applications is on the 25th. This is for ecosystem, social enterprise ecosystem level projects. So not for social enterprises themselves, but for projects that might support the broader capacity building of the ecosystem. So I won't delve into it, but information will be in the chat if you want to look closer. As well, Meredith and I co-host our Curious Conversations, and we are relaunching in 2023 with some really fun themes. So Setting Intentions is on January 20th, and we welcome you to just come. It's an hour and a half to just kind of talk about social enterprise stuff in a bit of a different way and dive deep into some of those conversations. For those social entrepreneurs looking for resources, please check out nomada.ca, which is our online resource navigation tool. And as well, we do have a social enterprise LinkedIn group and a little bit of a Calgary support group that's come out of that. So those links are all in the chat. I welcome you to explore if any of them are of interest to you. And with that, I think we are done. The next AMAASE is February 8th. I believe the link was posted in the chat earlier. So we welcome you to come back with those burning questions you didn't quite get to, and please invite your friends. And that we'll wave goodbye and let you all get to your evening. So thank you so much.